There's a manuscript in a vault at Oxford, catalogue reference, Bruce 74. It's a copy of the Book of Enoch, and it contains a chapter that most people who own a Bible have never read, because it isn't in one. Chapter 18 describes what happens to a planet when it dies, not a myth about it. A location. Enoch says you travel west, past the mountains, past the last place anything grows, past the point where the sky itself comes to an end. What's out there has no sky above it, and no ground beneath it. No water, no birds. He can't name the place, so he tells you what isn't in it. And that is where the dead worlds are kept. You've probably never heard that passage, and there's a reason. The church let this book go in the 4th century, and for 1400 years no complete copy existed anywhere in Europe. It survived in one place, Ethiopia, until Bruce carried 3 of them out in 1773. Then in 1947, at Qumran, 11 more came out of a cave with the Dead Sea Scrolls, in Aramaic, older than Christianity, and older than a good deal of the Bible that stayed in. The same passage, in both, which means the description survived intact for 2,000 years. So here is what it describes. 7 of them, out there in the dark, burning, held in place. Enoch says they look like mountains, and he asks the angel beside him what they are. Not rocks, not fires, not mountains. And over the next 18 minutes, what the manuscripts actually say, in 3 languages, what happens when a planet dies, and where the pieces end up. If forbidden biblical history fascinates you, subscribe. Every week we read what was removed. The angel gives him a word. Stars. But hold on to that, because it didn't mean then what it means now. In 300 BC there was no separate word for a planet. Everything that moved up there was a star, and the Greeks had a name for the handful that wouldn't hold their place. Planetes, the wanderers. So what Enoch is looking at is 7 wandering worlds, and Uriel tells him exactly what the place is. This is the end of heaven and earth. This has become a prison for the stars. That same line survives in the Aramaic at Qumran and the Greek fragments from Akhmim. 3 languages, no variation. Whoever copied this was careful with it. And look at the word he chose. Not a graveyard, not a wreck field, a prison. Which means these worlds weren't destroyed. They were sentenced. Someone decided where they would go and how long they would stay. And the text gives you the number. 10,000 years. Put that against human history. The Great Pyramid is about 4,500 years old. If the sentence started the day the first block went down at Giza, they wouldn't be halfway through it. 10,000 years is not a punishment for an accident. Which leaves the question Enoch himself is about to ask. What does a world have to do to get 10,000 years? And this is where it gets disturbing. Because Enoch doesn't ask. Not the first time. He's shown the place, he's told what's in it, and he moves on. Then 3 chapters later he comes back. He returns to the same spot at the end of the universe, stands in front of the same 7 burning worlds, and this time he puts it to Uriel directly. For what sin are they bound? On what account have they been cast in here? That's the question you've been carrying since the beginning. Enoch had it too. He went back for it. And the answer is one line. They did not come out at their appointed times. That's the charge. Not rebellion. Not war in heaven. Not corrupting mankind. This book has all of those crimes and names them in detail. And none of them apply here. 7 worlds were arrested for arriving late. Now understand what that meant to the people who wrote this down. The sky was the only clock anyone had. There was no other way to know when to plant, when to harvest, when the year turned. Everything that mattered hung on things overhead, showing up exactly when they were supposed to. A light that appears in the wrong place at the wrong time isn't a curiosity, it's a broken clock. And a broken clock, to them, was a threat to the entire order of the world, so they get 10,000 years. But here's the detail nobody stops on. The text tells you when the sentence started. It never tells you what happens when it ends. Now here's where it stops, being only a question about an old book. Because Enoch's charge assumes something specific. It assumes the sky is a system with rules, that every object in it has an assigned path and an assigned time, and that leaving your path is not an accident but a violation. For most of history that sounded like theology. It isn't. A planetary system is not clockwork. It's a crowd. Every world pulls on every other world, slightly, on every single orbit, and those pulls add up. Most of the time, they add up to nothing. Sometimes they don't. At first, nothing looks wrong. The planet completes another orbit, then another. Each pass by something larger nudges its path a fraction wider, until one pass nudges it too far. Then the planet swings outward and doesn't come back. Its sun shrinks behind it. The light thins, and then there's no sunrise at all. Not a dim one. None. Astronomers call them rogue planets. Worlds with no star, moving through the dark between systems. And the current estimates suggest there may be more of them out there than there are stars. An entire population of worlds thrown out of the order they were born into. Enoch's word for that was bound. Ours is ejected. Two descriptions of one event, written 22 centuries apart by people who could not possibly have compared notes. But ejection isn't death. A rogue planet is still a planet, cold, dark, intact, going nowhere. Which is the same problem sitting in chapter 18, because those 7 worlds are still burning. Here's what almost everyone misses about this passage. Read it again, and Enoch never once calls them dead. He says they're burning. He says they're bound. He says they have a sentence with a start and a finish. Uriel is asked what they did, and gives an answer. Wreckage doesn't serve a sentence. Wreckage doesn't have a release date. And that distinction is Enoch's, not ours. He had the vocabulary for destruction. This is the same book that describes the flood wiping the surface of the world clean, that describes bodies broken and spirits driven out. When he means annihilated, he says, annihilated. Here he means held. So the 7 at the end of the universe are not the remains of anything. They are worlds that failed and were removed, and are still going, still lit, still intact, waiting out 10,000 years in a place with no sky and no ground. That's containment, not death. And Enoch is precise enough about the difference that he shows you the comparison himself. Because after the 7, he keeps walking. And I went to another place, which was still more horrible than the former. Sit with that. The void with no sky and no ground. 7 burning worlds. A 10,000-year sentence. That was the mild one. The second place has no end date in the text at all. No number. No release. He describes the room and moves on, and nobody is told what's in it. So if the 7 aren't the dead ones, where are the dead ones? Enoch's 7 are the ones that were caught. But not every world that leaves its course gets taken somewhere. Some of them are destroyed outright, and we know exactly how, because we can watch it happen. A star like ours burns for about 10 billion years. Then the fuel runs out, the core collapses, and the outer layers swell, hundreds of times the original size. The planet hasn't moved. It's sitting exactly where it has always been. The danger is coming to it. For the inner worlds there is nowhere to go. They're overtaken, dragged inward, and pulled apart. And what's left at the center when it's over is a white dwarf, the dead core of the star. Roughly the mass of the sun, crushed into something the size of the Earth. And here's the part that shouldn't be possible. A white dwarf's gravity is so extreme that heavy elements can't stay on the surface. Iron, calcium, magnesium, anything heavier than helium sinks out of sight almost immediately. In the hot ones, that's a matter of days. So when astronomers look at a dead star and find rock sitting in its atmosphere, there is only one explanation available. Something delivered it recently. In 1987, a white dwarf called G2938 was found wrapped in a disk of warm dust. Nobody had predicted it. That star had no business having dust. 28 years later, in 2015, Kepler caught the act itself, an object crossing in front of a different white dwarf, trailing debris, dimming the star on a 4.5-hour cycle, a world coming apart in real time. More than a quarter of all white dwarfs show this, which means a quarter of the dead stars we look at are, right now, still swallowing their own planets. And those metals are readable. Put the light through a spectrograph and you get proportions. Iron, oxygen, magnesium, silicon. That's a composition. That is what the planet was made of, recovered from a world that stopped existing before anything on Earth was alive to watch it go. That is where the remains go. Enoch describes worlds that left their order and are still burning where they were put. Astronomy describes worlds that left their order and are still falling into the star that killed them. Those aren't the same claim, but they are the same shape. Now here's where it gets active. Because there's one more piece of this that sits in a book most people do own, and almost nobody reads. The New Testament quotes Enoch, directly, by name, in the letter of Jude. Verse 14, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these. Then Jude quotes 1 Enoch, chapter 1, word for word. So whoever wrote Jude had read this book, not heard of it. Read it, and look at what he writes 1 verse earlier. He's condemning a group, stacking up images for them, and he reaches for this. Asteroids planetae, wandering stars, to whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. Wandering stars, the exact Greek term for the planets, sentenced to darkness, reserved, held, forever. That is chapter 18, compressed into 6 words, sitting in the New Testament. Now go back to the surviving manuscripts. The Greek fragments from Akhmim preserve these chapters in the same language Jude was writing in, which means the vocabulary Jude used for the wanderers is the vocabulary that was already attached to this passage. Jude was not making an allusion. He was citing a case, and every English Bible on earth renders that phrase as wandering stars, which sounds like poetry, and lets you read straight past it. It isn't poetry. Planetae is a technical word. It's the word for the 7 objects that move. 2,000 years ago, a New Testament writer who had read the Book of Enoch used the Greek word for planet to describe something being sentenced to permanent darkness. That's not an interpretation. That's what's on the page. So, what do we actually have here? A man writing before Rome existed put it down plainly. Objects in the sky can leave their assigned courses. When they do, they are removed from the system they belong to. There is a specific place they end up, at the far edge of everything. And they are still burning when they arrive. 22 centuries later, we built instruments and went looking. We found worlds thrown out of their systems, drifting in the dark with no sun. We found dead stars with the crushed remains of planets falling into them. We found that the pieces are still there, still legible, and that we can read what the world was made of. He gave it a courtroom, where we give it a physics engine. Different language, same mechanism. And he was writing it down 2,000 years before anyone could check. There's one thing he never tells us. He gives the length of the sentence, 10,000 years. He tells us when it started. He never says what happens when it ends. Uriel doesn't explain. Enoch doesn't ask again. And the passage stops dead. The manuscripts are still where they've always been. Bruce 74 in a vault at Oxford. Fragment 4Q206, under glass, in Jerusalem. The Ge'ez copies behind stone walls in Aksum, in a church most people will never be permitted to enter. And 400 light-years away, a dead planet is still pulling down the last of a world that used to be somewhere. So look up tonight. Out of everything above you, every fixed star, every constellation that has held its shape for the whole of recorded history, what is the only kind of light that fails to keep time? You already know the answer. Enoch knew it too. The manuscript is still in Aksum. The 7 planets are still burning, and the sentence is still running.